What if the family you trusted most betrayed you for simply being who you are? What if the one person who stood by you became your only true home in a world full of judgment? What if a random ticket to fortune not only saved your future, but forced the past to face its mistakes? Sawyer Thompson stood at the kitchen table in his childhood home in suburban Ohio, holding the letter he had written the night before. The words on the page felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. Mom, Dad, I'm gay. He had practiced saying it out loud in the mirror 100 times, but now with both of them staring at him, the silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. His father, Robert, a retired factory supervisor, crossed his arms so tightly the veins on his forearms stood out. You're what? The question came out like a bark. Sawyer's mother, Linda, pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes already filling. Honey, this is a phase, right? You can't mean it. He tried to explain how long he had known how the secrecy had eaten him alive since high school, when he first felt his heart race around the boy who sat 2 rows ahead in math class. But every sentence he offered only tightened the knot in the room. Robert's face turned the color of raw meat. Not in my house. Not under my roof. Linda reached for Sawyer's arm, but Robert slapped her hand away. We raised you better than this. Pack your things. Tonight. The next hours blurred into a nightmare. Sawyer stuffed clothes, books, and the only photo he had of himself with his grandmother into a duffel bag, while his father stood in the doorway watching like a guard. No hug. No, I still love you. Just the slam of the front door at 2 in the morning and the cold October wind cutting through his thin jacket as he walked down the street he had ridden his bike on as a kid. He slept that first night on a bench at the bus station, his phone battery dead and his stomach hollow. By morning, he realized he had nowhere to go. Friends from high school had scattered to colleges or marriages, and the ones still in town had parents who would ask questions he could not answer. He found a shelter downtown run by a quiet man named Mr. Ellis, who asked no questions beyond, "You safe?" Sawyer took the bottom bunk and learned the rhythm of the place. Showers at 6, breakfast at 7, job listings posted on a corkboard. He lied on applications saying he had just moved for school and landed a part-time gig washing dishes at a diner on the edge of town. The pay barely covered bus fare, but it kept him moving. Nights were the worst. He would lie awake replaying his father's voice and wondering if Linda had cried herself to sleep or if she had already started telling neighbors he was troubled. 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday, he met Kingston. The shelter had a volunteer program, and Kingston arrived every afternoon with coffee and a smile that seemed to push back the gray walls. He was 27 tall with warm brown skin and eyes that crinkled when he laughed, handing out sandwiches like they were gifts. Sawyer watched him from across the room, trying not to stare. When Kingston sat down beside him and asked, "Rough day?" the simple kindness cracked something open. They talked until lights out about nothing and everything. Favorite movies, bad coffee, and the way the city smelled after rain. For the first time in months, Sawyer felt seen without being judged. By the end of the month, Kingston had helped him land a better job at the coffee shop where he worked afternoons. They started sharing shifts and then rides home. One night after closing, Kingston drove Sawyer back to the shelter, and instead of dropping him off, he said, "Stay at my place. Couch is yours, no pressure." The apartment was small but clean, with books stacked everywhere and a window that looked out over the river. Sawyer slept on the couch that first night, then the next, and soon the couch became a shared bed. They never rushed. Kingston made sure every step felt safe. When Sawyer finally whispered, "I've never done this before," Kingston just held him and said, "Then we'll learn together." Life settled into a fragile peace. They worked double shifts, saved every tip, and dreamed out loud about a future that did not include looking over their shoulders. Sawyer still woke some nights with his father's words ringing in his ears, but Kingston's arm around him always pulled him back. He told himself this was enough. He told himself he did not need the family that had thrown him away. The first year passed in a blur of small victories. Sawyer learned to make the perfect latte foam, and Kingston taught him how to budget so they could afford their own one-bedroom above the shop. They painted the walls soft blue and hung string lights that made the place feel like a tiny universe of their own. On weekends, they walked along the river hand in hand, careful at first, then bolder when they realized no one in the city cared the way his parents had. Kingston's family lived 3 states away and had known he was gay since he was 16. His mother sent care packages with notes that said, "Proud of you both." Sawyer read those notes like lifelines. Money stayed tight. They skipped dates to pay rent and shared one phone when Sawyer's died. But love filled the gaps. Kingston listened when Sawyer needed to talk about the empty chair at Thanksgiving, the birthday card that never came. He never pushed Sawyer to forgive. Instead, he said, "You get to decide what family means now." Those words planted something sturdy inside Sawyer. He started volunteering at the shelter again, this time as a mentor, helping other kids who had been kicked out. Seeing their scared faces mirrored his own past gave him purpose. One night, after a long shift, Kingston surprised him with tickets to a local Pride event. They danced under rainbow lights until their feet hurt, and for the first time Sawyer felt proud instead of ashamed. On the way home, Kingston stopped the car under a street lamp and said, "I love you, Sawyer. Not because you're easy, but because you're you." Sawyer cried right there on the passenger seat, the kind of cry that washes years of weight away. Yet the past refused to stay buried. Every Christmas, his mother's number would flash on his phone, then disappear. He never answered. Kingston would hold him afterward, and they would talk about building something new. They dreamed of a house with a yard, maybe adopting a dog. Sawyer started night classes at community college studying business because Kingston believed he could run his own cafe one day. The dream felt possible until the night the power went out, and they sat in the dark eating peanut butter sandwiches laughing, because what else could they do? That laughter became their armor. Sawyer's confidence grew in quiet ways. He stopped flinching when customers asked about his boyfriend. He started correcting people who assumed he and Kingston were just roommates. Each correction felt like another brick in the wall he was building around the life he had chosen. Kingston watched him bloom and said softly, "You're becoming the man you were always meant to be." Still, Sawyer carried a small box under the bed with the letter his mother had slipped under the shelter door 6 months after he left. It read, "We pray for you every night. Come home when you're ready to change." He never showed it to Kingston. Some wounds stayed private. 2 more years slipped by, and their little apartment started to feel like home. They had steady jobs, Kingston now managing the coffee shop and Sawyer handling inventory and social media. The extra money let them buy matching rings, simple silver bands they wore on their right hands because the world was not always kind. They took a weekend trip to Chicago, saw their first drag show, and came back talking about opening a cafe that welcomed everyone. Sawyer's grades at community college stayed high. He even made the dean's list. Kingston celebrated with homemade lasagna and a bottle of cheap wine they could finally afford. The shadow of his parents lingered in small moments. When Sawyer saw fathers tossing baseballs with sons in the park, his chest would tighten. Kingston noticed and would squeeze his hand without a word. They talked about maybe reaching out one day, but never made plans. Then came the night Sawyer found the lottery ticket. It was just a whim at the gas station while buying milk. The jackpot had climbed to $300 million, and the clerk joked, "Hey, you never know." Sawyer laughed, bought one ticket, and stuck it in his wallet, forgetting about it until the drawing. When the numbers flashed on the TV screen in their living room, he froze. Every digit matched. Kingston stared at the ticket, then at Sawyer, then back again. No way. They checked 3 times on 3 different sites. The room spun. Sawyer dropped to the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. Kingston pulled him up, and they danced around the tiny kitchen like kids who had just discovered magic. The next days blurred with lawyers, accountants, and non-disclosure agreements. They learned they had won $287 million after taxes. Enough to change everything. They paid off debts, bought a house with a yard, and set up a trust for the shelter. Sawyer's name stayed out of the papers at first, but the local news still ran the story of local man's life-changing win. He stared at the screen, feeling both invincible and terrified. Kingston kept him grounded. "This money doesn't change who we are. It just gives us choices." They made lists late into the night. College funds for kids they might foster, travel to places Sawyer had only seen in books, and a cafe that would hire kids fresh out of shelters. The future looked bright for the first time since he was 18. The news broke wider than they expected. Sawyer's face appeared on a morning show segment about everyday heroes who win big. His parents saw it. The first call came from his mother at 7 in the morning. He let it ring. The voicemail was shaky. "Sawyer, it's Mom. We saw the news. We're so happy for you. Can we talk?" He deleted it. Kingston watched quietly from the kitchen and said, "You don't owe them anything." But the calls kept coming. His father left a message, too voice tight, with something that sounded like regret. "Son, we made mistakes. Families should stick together no matter what. Sawyer played it twice, then turned off his phone. That night, he and Kingston sat on their new porch swing overlooking the river that ran behind their house. Sawyer finally spoke. "They threw me away like trash. Now they want the money." Kingston nodded. "Let's take it slow. You decide the next step." Sawyer decided to meet them. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. He chose a neutral cafe downtown, the same one where he had washed dishes years ago. His parents arrived early, his mother in a dress she had clearly bought for the occasion, his father in the same jacket he wore to church. They hugged him awkwardly like strangers. Linda's eyes filled when she saw the ring on his finger. "You look good, son. Healthy." Robert cleared his throat. "We were wrong back then. We were scared. The church, the neighbors." Sawyer listened without interrupting. He heard the apologies mixed with excuses and felt nothing but a dull ache. When they finally asked about the money, he told them the truth. "I'm setting up funds for the shelter and for kids like me. The rest is for me and Kingston and the life we're building." His father's face tightened. "We're still your parents. We could use help with the house, the medical bills." Sawyer stood up. "You had your chance to be parents when I needed you. I'm choosing my family now." He walked out, leaving them at the table. Kingston waited outside. They drove home in silence until Sawyer said, "I thought it would hurt more." Kingston smiled softly. "You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for." The family did not give up. Weeks later, his sister Emily, who had stayed silent all those years, showed up at their door with her husband and 2 kids. She cried on the porch. "I should have called. I was scared too." Sawyer let them in. The kids played in the yard while the adults talked. Emily admitted their parents had pressured her to cut contact. "Dad said you chose that lifestyle. I didn't know how to fight him." Sawyer felt the old anger rise, but Kingston's calm presence kept him steady. They shared dinner. The kids asked innocent questions about why Uncle Sawyer and Uncle Kingston had 2 rings. Sawyer answered simply, "Because we love each other." His parents tried again, this time through a lawyer, claiming emotional distress and demanding a share of the winnings. The letter arrived on thick paper that smelled like money. Sawyer read it once, then handed it to their attorney. The response was polite but firm. No settlement, no contact unless Sawyer chose it. The media picked up the story, "Lottery winner sued by estranged parents over sexuality." Headlines twisted facts. Reporters camped outside the cafe. Sawyer hated the spotlight, but he gave one interview on his own terms. "I was kicked out for being gay. The money didn't change my past, but it gave me a voice. I'm using it to help kids who are still sleeping on benches tonight." The backlash from their old church community was loud, but so was the support. Donations poured into the shelter. Kingston organized a fundraiser that raised more than Sawyer's parents had asked for. In the middle of the chaos, Sawyer realized something important. He no longer needed their approval. The man he had become did not flinch at their silence. One evening, his mother called again, alone this time. Her voice was raw. "I lost your father to his pride, Sawyer. He won't admit he was wrong, but I do. I'm sorry. I should have chosen you." Sawyer listened to her cry, and for the first time in years, he felt pity instead of rage. He did not forgive her yet, but he did not hang up either. The final meeting happened on neutral ground again, but this time Sawyer brought Kingston. They sat across from his parents in a quiet park pavilion. Robert looked smaller somehow, the factory supervisor reduced to a man who had lost control of the narrative. Linda reached across the table and touched Sawyer's hand. "We watched you on the news. You've built something real. We want to be part of that if you'll let us." Sawyer spoke carefully. "I'm not giving you money to buy forgiveness, but I'm setting up a college fund for your grandchildren and a small monthly stipend for you both. Not because you earned it, but because I choose mercy over the hate you taught me." His father's shoulders dropped. For the first time, Sawyer saw tears in the man's eyes. "I was wrong, son. I was scared of what people would say. I lost my boy because I cared more about pride than love." The words hung in the air like a truce. They did not become the family they once were, but they became something new. Phone calls on holidays. Visits that felt less like performances. Sawyer and Kingston flew to Ohio for Christmas the next year. The house smelled like pine and regret. Linda set 2 extra places at the table. Robert shook Kingston's hand and said, "Thank you for taking care of him when I didn't." It was not perfect. Old wounds still ached on quiet nights. But Sawyer woke up every morning next to the man who had never left and knew he had won something bigger than any jackpot. They opened the cafe 6 months later. The sign read, "Second Chances Brew," and the walls were covered with photos of kids who had once slept in shelters and now had futures. Sawyer stood behind the counter watching Kingston teach a new barista how to foam milk and felt the last piece of his old life settle into place. He was no longer the boy kicked out in the cold. He was a man who had chosen love, built a family, and turned pain into purpose. In the end, the lottery ticket had not healed the past. It had only given him the strength to write his own ending. Personal reflection. This story shows how conditional love can break a person, but unconditional choice can rebuild them stronger. Money may shift attitudes, yet real change begins when someone decides their worth is not up for negotiation. My advice is simple. Surround yourself with people who celebrate the real you and release the rest with grace when you're ready. The lesson is clear. Being true to your heart is the only jackpot that truly lasts. Family is not always blood. Sometimes it's the hand you hold when the world turns its back.